Proverbs, and we're going to finish chapter 1 today. So the last two lessons we studied the first 7 verses, talking about what is wisdom, and then we looked at temptation the previous session from verses 9 through to 19. And today we're going to finish off chapter 1 starting at verse 20, finishing all the way through to verse 33. Just as a foretaste. Sorry about my voice. I don't know what's going on here. I was sick over the weekend, but for some reason I feel great right now, but my voice is still terrible, so I don't know what's going on there. So let's read verse 20. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. Would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure, and will be at ease without dread of disaster. Amen. So, as we saw previously, we've seen a bit about what wisdom means already, and we saw that that's rooted in the fear of God. This passage does mention the fear of God again, but I don't want to go too deep into that because it comes up several times in Proverbs, and sometimes we might have to spend a whole session looking at just one verse that talks about the fear of God, so I don't want to go too deep into that right now. But if you want a bit more foundation and you haven't had the chance to come to these lessons already, then the first lecture in this series is a really good starting point for that for you. So we will go a bit deeper into what wisdom is, though, today. I think the passage is giving us that opportunity, and the way it's doing so is by portraying wisdom as a woman, which for us men is a bit like, whoa, hang on a second there, that's a bit weird, right? But when we know some wonderful and wise women, then that illuminates the picture and helps us think, actually, you know what, no, that's a really great idea that Solomon portrays wisdom as a woman. It might not be what we as men want to hear, but it's certainly a wonderful thing. So when we see this, we have to remember that Solomon is speaking to a group of young men, boys maybe even. We're not entirely sure about that. But hearing that wisdom is this female figure would probably be something that was very comforting to them. They're young men, they're young boys, and they obviously had a good relationship with their mother, or hopefully they had a good relationship with their mother. So to hear that this was a woman would be something attractive to them, a good thing. And chapter 7 and 9 play off the idea of the woman of wisdom, and we'll surely get there probably in a year, knowing my pace. But we'll get there eventually, and we'll see how Solomon uses this analogy and really makes it better, because you've got woman wisdom, but you've also got woman folly, and he plays those two off against each other in later chapters. And it gets really interesting and really cool how he uses that metaphor. So what her purpose is in this passage, however, is to talk about the consequences of foolishness. You need to listen to me is what she's saying, but if you don't listen to me, this is what's going to happen to you. And then at the end of that, once she's given her reasons for the consequences, she then tells us what the benefits of listening to her are. Now, we've already seen some of that in the first part of this, and also when we saw temptation. But Solomon's pulling it together here so that we can see it directly. Here's your consequences, and here's your benefits. And we'll see that style so much as we go through this book of Proverbs. We'll always see this is the bad thing, but then here's the good thing. Here's the good thing, but here's the bad thing if you don't listen to the good thing. And so starting off in this passage, verses 20 to 21, we read, Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets she raises her voice. At the head of noisy streets she cries out. At the entrance of the city she speaks. So wisdom is speaking up here. It's like a kind of town crier. You know what those are? They'd sort of ring a bell and they'd shout some noise, news, not noise. I think I remember playing many years ago a video game, Assassin's Creed, where you know it, yeah. Maybe Anna doesn't know it or Emma, but you'd have people standing on a big box and they'd say, like something your main character had done during the game. He'd say, "Ezio Auditore, the killer assassin is on the loose again." So that's the kind of thing that's going on here. This woman Wisdom is like kind of standing up in the midst of a great multitude of people, and she's preaching to them essentially, not in the sense that we preach in church, but she's giving them a message that they need to hear. And as one of the commentators that I read said, she's not a gentle woman here. She's not the woman that we necessarily see throughout the rest of Proverbs. She's firm. She knows what she wants to say. She says what she wants to say, and she says it kind of mercilessly. She knows that it's important, and she can't risk it going over people's heads by being too gentle about it. So I think that's important because what she has to say is so important. Her voice must cry out in the streets. She must be heard with what she wants to say. And note that she also goes to the marketplace. It's not just that she's going into the streets or any random streets and just trying to talk to anyone that she can talk to. She's going to a place of hustle and bustle where business is taking place. She's going wherever there are people, lots of people, and she's standing up in front of all of them and she's shouting, "You've got to listen to this message." She wants all kinds of people to hear her, not just a select few. It's not just the people in the king's chamber or the king's advisors that need to hear this. It's everyone that needs to hear this. And so after that, we see that she goes to a noisy streets. Now, I don't know if anyone reading from the Romanian there, I think it has a different translation there. So you've got in the markets, in the piazza, and then it says something else.
Zarva mai mare.
What on earth does that mean?
It's just huge murmur.
Right. So that's very similar to what my translation here says. It says in the noisy streets. Yeah, I looked into that a little bit. It seems that she was kind of being portrayed as standing on a wall, at least metaphorically, and just crying out to the whole town. Basically, what this verse is trying to convey is that she's speaking to lots of people and as many people as possible. But I thought that was a really interesting thing to note, that because when we read noisy streets, you kind of think, well, she won't be heard in a noisy street. But if you see it that way, where she's like literally standing on the town wall and shouting to everyone, "You have to listen to this," it has more impact on how we see it. And then finally, we read that she goes to the city gates. Now, that's also an interesting point. It might not be a point, but we see in the Bible that wherever there are people gathered at the city gates, that's usually where the elders did business in the town. So as an example of that, you see the book of Ruth. When Boaz went to redeem the land and take Ruth as his wife, he went to the gate, and he discussed that matter with the elders at the gate. So culturally speaking, whenever gates are mentioned and people being in the gates, it's often talking about the elders of the city, the people that rule. So she's going to the normal people on the streets, she's going to the business owners, and she's also going to the elders. She's going to everyone. So all sectors are in view here, not just the rich and the scholarly, but the simple and the naive. Everyone is part of this message. Everyone needs to hear it. So she goes to all these places. Her message is simple: listen or face the consequences. And she starts her message in verse 22. "How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge?" So we see that kind of love-hate dichotomy here, where we saw it already in 2 lessons ago. Pardon me. We saw, if we can go back to that people who love wisdom, they fear the Lord, but those who are foolish, they hate wisdom. They're foolish. So that idea is coming back again here. And simply said, that the simple-minded love to just be stupid. That's essentially what she's saying. You're being silly, you're not listening to wisdom, and you're just adding to your foolishness, you're adding to your stupidity. And that kind of, we read that with kind of judgmental eyes. I think we kind of look at that and say, yes, those stupid people, without realizing that very often we are those stupid people. We are those people that don't listen to wisdom and don't listen to counsel when people have something to tell us. And a very modern example I find of that is with biblical counseling, being a biblical counselor. There are so many cases where I've seen people that really needed counseling, and you propose that to them and they say, No, I think I'll see a psychologist instead. Now, I don't know if any of you are studying psychology or anything like that. We can talk about that afterwards, not right now, but that's a whole other discussion. But the point that I want to make is that you have someone that can help you understand what the Bible says about your situation, but you say, no, I'm going to throw that out and take something that the world is telling me about my situation. And so you throw away the wise option and take on the secular option. And so that's just as an example of what goes on in people's brains when they see that. And so quite often that's us, right? We want to take the easy way out. We want to take the world's way out of a problem rather than listen to what the Bible has to say to us. So we also have here scoffers. Now I think that's people at Bajok in Romanian, yeah. So a scoffer is just someone that's whatever, stupid wisdom. Often how a husband responds to his wife's words of counsel. Oh, my wife's not laughing. Okay, I'm in trouble. So they see no benefit in learning, and they turn their nose up to it. They say, "This is for the peasants. We don't need this. We're much better off without this." And so, as we think about that, and we think about how easy it is to be that person ourselves, let us ask ourselves: am I that person right now? Have I rejected wisdom today? Have I rejected wisdom in the last 2 weeks since we last came together? If so, we need to pay attention to what comes next, because that seems to be all she wants to say at first. If you imagine she's standing up there and you just sort of paint the picture and she says, you people, you're not listening. But soon things are going to change. And so we read in verse 23, she doesn't just say a kind of conditional, oh, why are you doing this? She then goes on with the hammer of it. She shouts, if you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. But notice that there's an if there. It's conditional. It's not, oh, everyone can receive this whenever. Anyone can have this right now, in the sense that you don't have to put any effort in and you've got it. You have to pursue this. You have to want it. You have to change your ways. And then wisdom is given to you throughout the process of life. It's not something that you can just open your arms and God's going to give it to you straight out. We're not all Solomon, unfortunately. But if we do open our hearts and we do open our minds and we're ready to receive wisdom, then we read here that it will be poured out on you. It says, pour out my spirit to you. Now, I think some people might want to try and apply that to the Holy Spirit being poured out on us. None of my commentaries said that that was the case, so it probably isn't the case. And I don't think so. I think it's just a really rich imagery to suggest how it would be. So if someone has a full bucket of water and you want that water and you think how precious water was in those days to those people, and you read of something being poured out on you like water, just think about how refreshing and amazing that would sound to them. And so it's designed to sound attractive in this case. The woman wants people to realize that I'm willing to just give this whole thing to you, but you have to work for it and you have to want it. So she makes her words known, and basically when we open our hearts, when we open our minds, as I said before, wisdom does start to work in our lives. Things that didn't make sense before will begin to make sense in our lives. And I gave you that illustration on the first session, where when I first became a Christian, I didn't understand so many of the hymns that I was singing. But over time, as I learned and I grew and had experience of the Christian life, then the hymns began to make sense to me. And we all testified on that occasion that was true for us all. And so, since we're going over examples that we've already given, let's go back to Peter again. Peter is once again a brilliant example. He was rash, he was arrogant, he was quick to speak, and he was slow to listen. Yet he realized later on his actions. Now, for example, we see him jump out of the boat, straight out of the boat when he sees Jesus walking on the water. And he realizes what he's done. He's like, I'm an idiot. Why am I walking on water? This is stupid. And then he starts to sink because his faith is failing. But then later on in the book of Acts, after Jesus has died and risen again, we see a much different Peter. We see him slow, calculated. We see him at the Jerusalem Council, for example. He doesn't just stand up and say his opinion straight away. He lets everyone talk, and then he motions for silence and says, okay, brothers, this is how it is. Wisdom has worked in his life. Likewise, when he was in prison in the book of Acts, we see a former Peter, before Jesus had died and resurrected, would have been pacing around his cell, or I guess he was chained there, but he would have been agitated. He wouldn't have been able to sleep. But what's he doing? He's just sleeping. He trusts the Lord. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. He had the wisdom to realize that at that point. So Peter is a really great example for us if you want to see someone that God worked in to change and give wisdom to. Peter is just such a brilliant example. You see him from his early life with all that rashness, and you see how God changed him and brought him into wisdom. And so now just going back to our passage there, now the rebuke will return. People have rejected wisdom, and this is what follows, verses 24 and 25. Because I have called you, and you refused to listen. Oh, sorry, I closed my eyes and lost have stretched out my hand, and and no one has heeded. Because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof. So wisdom called to people, but they didn't listen. They didn't want to pay attention. And let me just ask this right now. Let's just be deep and serious about our own personal spiritual lives right now. Have you ever been in this situation where wisdom has called to you saying, don't do that thing, or do that thing right now, it's the right thing to do, and you've just flat out ignored it? And I actually wrote down here in my notes that saying something in anger in a tense situation was a good example. And I wrote this 2 weeks ago, and the very day I wrote it, I ended up in a situation where someone was saying some very agitating things to me and over Facebook, and I was responding in anger. And Emma was even sitting right next to me saying, don't respond to that, just let it go, just let it go. I was like, no. And so what resulted from that was, and this wasn't a situation that ended up really bad. It was an hour of difficulty and then just went away. It wasn't something serious in the end. But say something like that happens to most of us. Normally we end up in this huge period of time where we have to reconcile our relationships, or we go deeper into bitterness. And if we had started off listening to that little small voice in our head saying, no, this isn't going to help if I angrily respond to this person right now, then the situation would have been different, and we wouldn't have had to have wasted our time on reconciliation or working through things. So in this case, wisdom has stretched out her hand in that moment, but if you were given over to your anger in that moment, you chose not to listen. Wisdom's right there saying, choose me, choose me, choose me. And you choose not to listen to her, just as I did on that occasion. And so you ignored her counsels and your rebukes, and you gave a rash and aggressive response to something. Well, what happened? Well, like I said, you could easily destroy a friendship with that. Years of building a friendship can be destroyed with one argument, sometimes one really big argument. And the devil knows that, and he wants us to have those kinds of arguments with each other. He wants us to fight in the church over silly little things like what color the paint should be on the wall. And sadly, people do fight over those things. And we have to do our best to push those thoughts of the devil, the thoughts of our flesh out, and say, right, I'm going to listen to what's wise here. I'm not going to respond quickly. I'm going to take my time. And so, as we've considered that, we turn to verses 26 and 27, which read, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you. So you see, she's put herself out there. She said, I'm wisdom, listen to me. She's been rejected, and now she's seeing the consequences that the person who has rejected her is going through. So in this case, it would be the destroyed friendship. She's seeing that, but it's too late now for that person. That friendship is destroyed. And so it says here she's laughing. She's mocking at the calamity. I think that can be really easily misrepresented. I don't see it in the kind of batshokkeritor, the kind of scoffing way. I think the passage here specifically tries to draw that dichotomy by saying, look, these bad guys are the scoffers, but mocking is different. Otherwise, I don't think there would be two different words here. So I think what's being represented here is that feeling that we all have when we've done the wrong thing, we haven't listened to wisdom, and then that our conscience is speaking to us in that moment and says, look, you shouldn't have done that if you hadn't done that, or you should have done that if you had done that, then things would be different, and you're reflecting on it and you're thinking. And I think that's the kind of torment that our consciences go through when we realize that we've done the wrong thing and acted in foolishness. And I think that's what the passage here is referring to when it talks about the mocking, the laughter of wisdom against us. And so disaster has come because of a lack of wisdom, and now the situation is in turmoil. And it will be like a storm or a whirlwind in our lives. Something chaotic and destructive that could easily have been avoided if we just hadn't sent that message, we hadn't picked up the phone, or we hadn't gone to that person's house, or anything. It could be. So can any of you relate to this? I've seen people nodding heads. Can you tracking with this? You really feeling this one? Yeah. So before anything else, learn from your previous mistakes. So I would be foolish if I went through that situation that I just shared with you and I didn't think about it again when I'm next in that situation. Because people write irritating messages to me on Facebook all the time, and I have to deal with that a lot. And I can learn from my previous experiences not to do that same thing again. But I'm a fool if I choose not to learn from that. So keep that in mind for whatever comes to your minds at the moment. But as far as that specific situation goes, if you've gotten angry with someone, it's too late to go back on that. You've gotten angry, you maybe broken your friendship. Now, it doesn't mean that it's too late to restore things, but it's too late to take the anger back. It's too late to change that in that sense. And that's what our passage is trying to say. The wisdom that you should have had, you didn't have, and now it's sort of floating around there in our consciousness, in our minds, saying, this is what you should have done. Now, maybe later on, as you've learned from your mistake, then you can pick that up later. But for now, our passage is just showing us that there's those consequences. So now in verse 28, we read that they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me. And that's just showing us that situation. If only I had listened. If only I had paid attention to wisdom in that moment. You might regret and wish you could turn back time, but you can't. And maybe there's someone in this room right now that's suffering as a result of that. And I'm not saying these things knowing that, obviously, if that's the case. I'm not saying it to try and target any of you, but quite often as a preacher and a teacher, you say these things, and obviously the Lord works in amazing ways, and he just brings people to hear those things when they need to hear them. So I'd love to discuss that more, but for now, just realize that you can't turn back time, but you can work with the future. Okay, so the reality is from verses 29 to 30. Because they hated knowledge. So that's us that react badly to situations. We hated knowledge in that moment. We hated wisdom. And we did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof. And so that's the reality there. We have to face the consequences when we don't do what's wise. And again, we see hatred right here in this passage. It's not just, I'm going to ignore this. It's actual hatred. It's a deliberate attack on what is the good thing to do. And such people, like you and I, like many people around the world and many good Christians, when we don't do the right thing, we choose to hate knowledge. We say, I know this is wrong, but I'm still going to do it. And we refuse to fear God. We say, it doesn't matter, God's holy, but, it doesn't matter because, he'll forgive me or whatever. And even though God's holy, I don't care. I'm going to do that wrong thing. That's what we say every time we sin. And so in the context of the angry situation, we chose to satisfy our feelings for revenge by yelling at that person or getting angry or trying to scare them into giving us what we wanted. And we just abandoned completely the fear of God. We said, no, God doesn't matter in this equation. What I want is what matters. And because of that, we've thrown away wisdom. And if we feared God, we wouldn't dare sin. That's the true reality of it. If we really were absorbed so much into the reality of who God is and what he's done for us and the amazingness of his sovereign holiness, the fact that he sees everything we do, the fact that he knows everything we do before we do it, and the fact that our unholiness is such an offense to his burning wrath and his judgment. If we really absorbed that and really paid attention to that reality, it would make a whole lot of difference to us in our Christian lives. So we wouldn't reject wisdom if we truly feared God, knowing that he's watching. But the moment we choose to sin, we said we don't care anymore. We hated all knowledge and wisdom and ignored God. So wisdom would have dictated a better path. That's the thing to note here. Wisdom would have dictated always will dictate a better path if we're willing to listen, but so often we choose the wrong path. And so to that wisdom then says in verse 31, therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices. Basically, in English we say, you've made your bed, you lie in it. You know that expression, right, guys? Yeah. You've made your bed, you lie in it. You planted the tree badly, and now you're going to eat bad fruit. That's not an expression in English or Romanian. I just made it up, but that's I think it's a good expression. So basically, what that's saying is you have to stand under the decisions you've made. You have to live in the reality of what you've done. You have to stand under all of that. And that's kind of scary, right? It's fearful. Like, we have to make hundreds, thousands of decisions every day. We're faced with consequences and decisions every day. And we're reading right now, if we take the wrong one, that we could end up in turmoil in our lives. And it happens like that. I mean, so many of us can probably point to stages in our lives, maybe the older among us, but where we have made in a split moment, we've just made the wrong decision for something, and it's changed the entire course of our lives, and then we've ended up on some distant island to what we were initially heading for. Not that that's not something that God has used and blessed us with in the long run, but our lives can change completely just because of one stupid mistake. And a really good example of that in history, actually, is what's his name? He's one of my missionary heroes, and I forget his name. David Brainerd. You know who that is? I think you know, Adrian, yeah. David Brainerd was a missionary to the native Indians of America, and he studied at Princeton University, where he arrogantly said that one of his professors had less grace than a chair leg, which, if I heard that when I was in seminary, I probably would have high-fived him and been thrown out myself. But basically, he was a gifted student. He was on his way to becoming a great pastor, and because of that one silly little thing that he did, he was thrown out of the university, and it changed his life. Now, we on this side of history can see the benefits of that because he wasn't able to be a pastor, he was then able to be a missionary to the Indians, and he converted thousands, probably tens of thousands of Indians in that time. So even though we have made bad decisions in the past because we've ignored wisdom, doesn't mean that God can't use us in the future. So that's also important to keep in mind as we go through this. So as we think about the terror of that, the terror of making bad decisions, let's just rejoice as well that God loves us so much that he doesn't just abandon us to our bad decisions. He works with them. He helps us through them, and uses them in amazing ways later on in life sometimes too. So what Solomon wants us to learn here is that we have to control our reactions. We must learn to be slow to speak, as James says, and quick to listen. Slow to speak, quick to listen. And especially us men, we're not very good at that. Especially us married men, right? We laugh, but yeah, we laugh, but back in our wives' minds, it's like, you shouldn't be laughing. Is that right, darling?
I shouldn't be laughing already.
Well, if you're laughing, I'm safe. So, yeah. So slow to speak, slow to act as well. We're too quick to act sometimes, and let us learn to fall back on decisions. Let's have some self-control and just think things through before we speak, think things through before we act, and think, if I truly fear God, would I do this thing? If I truly fear God, would I say this thing? So otherwise we'll feel the full measure of our foolishness. We'll feel that. We'll see it in our lives as the consequences break out. And as a final note of those consequences, we read in verse 32, "For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them." Ultimately, if we live in foolishness, rejecting wisdom, then it will lead to our doom. It'll lead to our downfall in life. In our example, you can repent for that mistake. You can keep repeating that mistake, and it'll just spiral you down into this bitter life, and you'll have nothing in your life but bitterness and anger. And speaking as someone that struggled a lot with his anger and bitterness in his life, I know that if I choose to hold a grudge against someone, it takes energy. It takes energy to hate someone. And if you truly hold on to that, it will just consume your life. You'll just see everything that person does as something with bad intentions or something that he shouldn't be doing. And so that one choice to have an argument with him can lead to consuming your whole life with bitterness. But because this is the Bible, there is hope. There is always hope where it comes to the Bible, at least in this life. Verse 33, "But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster." Now that's very comforting for us after we've seen through all of that harshness, that violence, that firmness. So in contrast to the disasters that befall the unwise, verse 33 shows us the benefits of listening to wisdom. There is security for the wise. Those of us that choose to walk on the path of wisdom, there is security for us. People that are wise, they know how to portion their finances. They know how to provide food for their families. They know when to go to work. They know how much time to put into things. They know what to do with everything in their lives. And because of wisdom, there is less fear of disaster. If we act wisely, then there's less to worry about in life, right? Because we've acted wisely, and so there's just less that could attack us. But if we're foolish with our finances or we're foolish with our time, then all these other things might come into our lives that we know we've opened a kind of portal, quote unquote, to because we acted foolishly. But if we make the right decisions and if we secure our lives and everything in them with wisdom, then there's a lot more calmness for us. Now, is this an absolute? Is this an absolute? No. Right, so as with so many passages of Proverbs, it's a generality, it's not an absolute. So for example, later on in Proverbs, there's a verse that says, a gentle answer turns away anger. Does that mean that every time that we give a gentle answer to someone that's angry, that they're going to just calm down immediately? No. But it's a generality. Sometimes that does happen, and quite often it does actually. You'd be surprised. So what we're reading here is not an absolute. It's a generality. So generally, if we listen to wisdom, then we will have ease and peace in our lives, because it helps us to react in situations as God would have us to react in those situations, and not according to our flesh, not according to the ways that we want to react. But that doesn't mean that if we do everything wisely in our lives that there's never going to be problems in our lives. That's what we need to underline here. It might reduce the problems, it might make things easier in life if we invest in wisdom, but it will not remove all the problems of our lives. That's what we have to realize. But when those problems come, we will be able to deal with them better because we are experienced in wisdom. So it has nothing but benefit. So in conclusion, ignoring wisdom is bad and it can lead to disaster, but listening is good and produces fruit in our lives. So look into your lives right now. Look into everything you are. Where can you learn from your mistakes that you've made in the last 2 weeks, and where can you better cultivate wisdom for the future? So you've seen the suffering in this passage that comes from a lack of wisdom. Learn where you've gone wrong and bury it deep in your heart so that next time you're in a similar situation, you're able to respond as the Bible would have you to respond. Amen.